Welcome, everyone, to It's Time to Excel. It is your time to ignite and inspire the possibilities that are all around you. And I am so honored and blessed to have my friend Lindsey Reedy back on our show again because she always has the greatest topics to start really getting us thinking, especially small business owners. And I know we're just going to jump in because she's got such great content to share with us today. And I know she's going to share screen. So I'm going to take that banner back off and we're going to give her power and we're going to let her take over. But Lindsey's with Hill Law Firm and she is just an advocate for small business owners. And that's what I just love. And we've been able to connect over the last, and you've been on before with me, and it's just been such great information. And one of the biggest topics we both get, and I always refer them over to you because I'm like, that's not my conversation that I want to have, is what's the best entity? Like, what do we mean by an entity? Most people don't even know what an entity is to start with when they're starting out. Everyone hears LLC, but there's pros and cons there. There's pros and cons to S Corp. But then all of a sudden, you got the deer in the headlight look.
Oh, yes.
And that's what we're going to clarify today. So I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to let you jump right on in. So we do thank those and I'll monitor the chat as we're going.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay.
It's thinking. I made us smaller.
Did it go ahead and put the slideshow up?
I do not see the slideshow yet. Technology, it's lovely when it's our friend.
I feel like this is a constant, just trying to learn how to adjust to the new technology surrounding the pandemic.
And they change. That's the hard part. We had it down. We've done this before. It's not like we've done this.
This is so odd. Okay, give me just a second. It's, for whatever reason, it is not allowing me to share. What I may just do is I'll just share my my actual screen instead of sharing the, let's see if that will work. No, it's still not working.
Well, that is craziness. Because I know it's done it before.
I know. Well,
it's a crazy topic.
It's so odd. I'm not sure what is going on. Let me see. I apologize for the technical difficulties.
It is part of it. And I think as small business owners, how often does that happen? We just got to roll with the punches because every time we turn around, there's something else that's in the way that's causing us to get flipped around or causing us to step backward instead of forward.
Oh, absolutely. And if we can't get it pulled up, what we'll do is we can I'll talk through everything.
Absolutely.
And then, maybe you can post a link or something to it later on.
Absolutely. We can definitely put a link in there. If you have a shared location, we can back in on the comments and drop that out.
Absolutely. All right. It is not looking like it's going to work. So what I'll do is I'll just roll through these, and whoever wants the actual slideshow later on, they can either reach out to me individually or reach out to you, and I'll pass these along.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course. So starting off, when you're selecting the entity for your business, there's a lot of strategy in how you go about selecting it. There are advantages and disadvantages to each type of entity. And so this is something you're going to want to consult with a CPA as well as an attorney about. So there are a few main entity structures. So you have your LLC, or your limited liability company, which is the most common entity structure used for small businesses. You also have your C corporation, your sole proprietorship, various types of partnerships, and your S corporation. So starting off with your sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is someone who owns an unincorporated business by himself or herself. So what this means is, for example, with an LLC, you have to file your articles of organization with the Secretary of State. But with a sole proprietorship, you don't have to file anything with the Secretary of State. The only thing that you may want to file for marketing purposes, not for liability purposes, is a doing business as, or a certificate of an assumed name, and that can be filed with your Register of Deeds in the county that your business is located in. And that can actually apply all across North Carolina. So that is something to consider for marketing purposes only. Now, the advantages to having a sole proprietorship is obviously the startup costs it's very cheap. You're not going to have these initial filings with the Secretary of State that are going to have filing fees. And the actual capital necessary to set up a sole proprietorship is just going to be significantly less than what you're looking at for an LLC or a corporation. Another advantage to this is that there's easy record keeping with a sole proprietorship because you're on your own and you can manage the records that are being kept by the business. It's just you, so it is so much easier than having to work amongst a group of people and trying to make sure all of these records are kept correctly. The last advantage to this is that as the sole owner, you will have the entire ownership stake in the business, and you're going to have full control over the decisions for the business, as well as for any maintenance that needs to be done with the business. Now, there are several disadvantages to sole proprietorship, and I think the most obvious and most common one is that you have unlimited personal liability. So what that will mean is that you personally will be responsible for the debts and obligations of the business. So, for example, if someone sues you for work that you've done on their home, and because you did it incorrectly or you damaged their home, maybe as a contractor or something, then they can sue you directly, personally, to receive those damages that have been caused to their home. And so there's just not much asset protection in this entity structure. And so that's really the main reason I do not typically recommend it to small business owners. And the last disadvantage, and something that needs to be considered when you're setting up your business, and especially what you want to do with the business. Is this something that you want to grow and pass on to your children? Is this something that what are your plans for it? Do you have any directives? Do you have any documents in place? But essentially, by default, if you don't have adequate documents in place, if the owner of the sole proprietorship passes away or if they become disabled, then that company will end. And so that is something you want to keep in mind when we're thinking about long-term planning.
And that's a great point. And I think that's most people, they get started, and that's a good place to get started. But as you pointed out, there's some significant disadvantages to consider.
Right. And, it's one of those things where entrepreneurs, when you're hiring professionals such as an attorney, we're not only looking at the short-term implications of the structure of your entity, but we're looking at long-term. We're thinking about your goals for the business. What do you want to do with this? What are your aspirations for the business? And so we're keeping all that in mind while we're selecting the actual entity. Now, the next type of entity are partnerships, and there are 4 types of partnerships. You have general partnerships, limited partnerships, limited liability partnerships, and limited liability limited partnerships. Now, the difference in them is it's minute, and the factual circumstances of your business, who your partners are going to be, will dictate how you set up a partnership. So for general partnerships, in this type of partnership, each partner is held personally liable for all debts, taxes, and claims against the business. So all partners are treated the same, which this is different from your limited partnerships. In that type of partnership, you have both general partners and limited partners, and it restricts the amount of personal liability to a limited partner by only holding them liable for the amount of investment they've made for the initial and subsequent capital contributions that they have made to the business. Now, with limited liability partnerships, in this type of partnership, the partners, limited and general, will all be liable for the general obligations of the partnership, but their liability is limited to each his or her own capital contribution for the malpractice of another partner. So for essentially what that means is all of these partners will be liable for the general debts of the company, but when it comes to the malpractice or bad faith of one of the partners, if the company gets sued for that, then they will only be personally liable to the extent that they have contributed monetary investments into the company.
Okay.
And then the last and final type of partnership is your limited liability limited partnership. And for this type of partnership, you have general partners and you have limited partners. And for the general partners, they have unlimited personal liability for the general obligations of the company, but each partner's liability for the professional malpractice of another partner is limited to his or her own capital contribution, and the liability of the limited partners is limited across the board to just their capital contributions. And so I know that can be a little confusing. There's kind of some details there on how you pick which one. And what it will primarily depend upon is if you're bringing in partners that are investors and don't really want management in the company or a management role, then that may implicate or dictate what type of partnership you choose to set up. So that's things to keep in mind on the various types of partnerships. Now, general partnerships are the most common type of partnership, and there are advantages and disadvantages to going with these. The advantages are that it provides you with the ability to combine the financial resources of all the partners, which can be beneficial depending on what your startup costs are to order supplies or things of that nature. This is set as a pass-through tax structure, which is a benefit to most small businesses. And in this type of structure, you and your partner can set up exactly how the business is supposed to be managed. There aren't any restrictions that you may find with an LLC or a corporation. And so that can be beneficial. Now, the disadvantages, in my opinion, most of the time outweigh the advantages with a partnership. And the obvious reason, just like we talked about with the sole proprietorship, is that there is unlimited personal liability with this. You have no liability protection and your assets are at risk. And so that is something to consider. And I think it's important for risk management purposes, sitting here as an attorney, when I'm talking to clients about what entity selection or structure they should select, that is one of the top things I think about is how do we mitigate the risks for the people that are investing into the small business? How do we mitigate the risk for the owners of this business? And so just something to think through. And that's just like with the sole proprietorship. That's why I typically do not suggest that you go with this entity structure. So that leads me to the most common entity structure. This is what everyone hears. This is what you think about when you think of a small business. And this is the limited liability company. So a limited liability company is a structure that is allowed by state statute. And you form this company by filing the necessary documents with your state's Secretary of State. So here in North Carolina, the way you would set up an LLC is on their website, they offer and provide the articles of organization. And so you'll fill that paperwork out and you can actually submit it online or via paper. The filing fee for that is, if you mail it and do it paper-wise, it is $125. If you submit it online, it's $128. And so that's how it's created. Now, there are two types of LLCs, not really types, but the way that it'll be set up. You have multi-member LLCs, who the default tax selection will be treated as a partnership. And then you have a single member or sole member LLC. And the default for that is that it's going to be disregarded as an entity separate from its owner.
And I think that's really important to keep that going. And that's why that's the main thing, is at least get some protection. That's the step one.
Exactly. And so one of the other benefits is that for federal tax purposes, an LLC can actually make tax elections to be treated as a partnership, a corporation, or it can be disregarded as an entity separate from its owner. And we'll talk about that a little later. So just quickly to run through some advantages and disadvantages that you should keep in mind when you're selecting your entity structure is the first is that the obvious advantage here is the limited liability for your members or your owners and for the managers of the company. So that is one of the biggest selling points for an LLC. The other part of this is for LLCs, it's very flexible management-wise. So there's two ways that you can set up an LLC. It can be member managed, which is owner managed, or it can be manager managed. So you can select people, it doesn't have to be owners, to actually manage the business. And so the LLC gives you some flexibility on that. Now, as mentioned previously, the tax election capability is also a very big benefit here because you can make a tax election that is most advantageous to you and your business. And then the last main advantage that we talk through with clients when we're trying to decide what entity structure makes the best sense for their business is that an LLC provides you with the flexibility and the ability to allocate profits and losses to members. So, but one thing to keep in mind there is that may not be available to you depending upon what tax election you make. If you keep it as the default, then that will be available to you. But if you make a tax election such as an S election, which we'll discuss, it may not be an advantage that you can utilize. So something to keep in mind, and that's something an attorney or CPA will walk you through when you are sitting in an initial consultation trying to decide what entity to select. Now, the two disadvantages to the LLC that are the largest disadvantages is that compared to a sole proprietorship and a partnership, it is going to have extra fees. It's going to be a higher startup cost, mainly because you have filing fees and you also will have just some initial other filings that will need to happen for you to be fully operational. And then the second part of this is there might be some transferability restrictions, and that will be dictated in your operating agreement. So just quick side note, an operating agreement for those that don't know, this is an agreement that you enter into with the company as well as the other members of your LLC. And essentially it dictates how decisions are going to be made. How is the business going to be run? How is it going to be taxed? How are we, just various aspects of your business will be delineated in that operating agreement. And one of the provisions that can be in there is that you as a member may be restricted from transferring the membership units that you own to another person, depending on what is in the operating agreement itself. So that is something to also consider.
A little bit to consider, but that's okay. That's why we're going to break it down little snippets of, we're kind of touching the surface here. Just to keep people thinking.
Exactly. There are so many things that, you really should be considering when you're trying to decide this. I think most people just by default choose an LLC, and that isn't always the best decision for your business. So just keeping these in mind, and if you set up a consultation with a CPA or an attorney, having these in your back pocket as things you can ask about and just discuss.
I think that's important if you got to know what to ask.
Exactly. Just knowing and understanding what may be beneficial to your company and just some talking points that you can go over.
Perfect.
So the next subset of entities are corporations. There are three main types. You have your C corporation, your S corporation, and your nonprofit corporation or nonprofit organization. We're not going to talk about the nonprofit mainly because it is a whole subset within itself. And there are a lot of people that actually specialize in that. So I'm going to stick with the most common C corporation and discuss that, as well as an S election to turn you into an S corporation. So let's start with the S corporation. I have talked about this in a few different groups that I'm in, just, things that you should be thinking through on the entity structure. So to become an S corporation, this is actually just a tax election that you make by filing a form with the Internal Revenue Service. And so both LLCs and corporations can make this tax election. Now, this is beneficial to LLCs and corporations for different reasons. So for your LLC, it's going to provide tax savings as to your employment taxes. And for corporations, it just prevents the double taxation that we all hear is the evil of setting up a corporation. Some other benefits to consider and maybe bring up with your attorney or CPA is the ability to offer employees and owners various tax advantaged fringe benefits, stock options, and stock ownership plans, which none of those will be subject to double taxation, which can be beneficial depending upon the plans for your company, how you're going to grow, whether you're bringing on employees, how you're going to capture talent, and things of that nature. The next is the C corporation. So the two most common are LLCs and C corporations. So I want to touch on the C corp really quickly. The C corporation, it is a legal entity that is completely separate from its owners, and it offers the strongest protection from personal liability, even more than an LLC does. Now, the issues and some of the biggest complaints I get about C corporations are that they do require more extensive record keeping, and there is significantly more extensive operational processes and reporting requirements. So that is something to keep in mind as well when you are moving towards selecting a C corporation. The other last thing that I had mentioned of the evil of selecting a C corporation is that it is susceptible to double taxation. And essentially what that means is that it's going to be taxed at the company level and then at the individual level as well. So that can be a disadvantage that may sway you from choosing this structure. Just a couple more advantages and disadvantages of a C corporation. The advantages of having a C corporation, one of the biggest ones is it allows for many owners. So if you're needing to raise capital or bringing on outside investors, a C corporation may be the best option for you. Now, what I will say is related to making an S election. If for whatever reason you have a C corporation, you want to elect to make an S election and treat it as an S corporation, then there are restrictions for an S corporation, such as you can't have more than 100 shareholders. So keep that in mind on if you're planning to have an extensive amount of shareholders, an S election may not be right for you. You may just have to stick with a C corp. Another advantage is that C corporations meet the requirements to have the Section 1202 small business capital gains exclusion. So C corporations are typically all that actually meet the requirements to meet or to have that exclusion. There are some arguments for S corporations, but they're much more than we can dive into today. So mainly this exclusion is only for C corporations, and this can be beneficial to your shareholders. So that's something to keep in mind. Another advantage is obviously there are some tax advantages with a C corp, such as your tax deductible business expenses. So that may even out some of the potential negative tax consequences of having a C corp. And the most obvious one that I've preached as a business attorney pertaining to risk management in and of itself is that it offers limited liability. And so it protects you and protects your shareholders and beyond, and just making sure that we're mitigating as much risk as possible to you and your families. Now, the disadvantages beyond double taxation is that there are stricter operational processes. So you're going to be required to have an annual board meeting. You're going to have to make sure you're keeping your books correct and make sure your record keeping is, it has to be pristine. So you have to make sure you're meeting these requirements to protect your C corporation. And then the last real disadvantage here is that it doesn't provide you a lot of flexibility when it comes to decision making. that you would have for maybe a sole member LLC. So since you have all of these shareholders, you have all of these people that are involved in decision-making processes, it can be much harder to move forward on a decision that needs to be made than if you were just a sole member LLC. So that is also something to consider on how much you want to be able to hold the reins and direct your company.
And there's so much information here, and I know that we have just thrown a whole lot of it out here. Yeah. And I know we're running close on time too, so as long as we do try to be respectful.
And that is my last little tidbit. The rest of it, if you want to go into more depth, I'm more than happy to take phone calls. I will put my information or have Janet put my information in
what
play.
Is there a good way? I'm going to post it up here on the thing. What's the best way to reach out to you?
So the best way is just to give me a call at 919-275-2053, and we can get a consultation set up to discuss what might be the best option for you. And if you've already selected your entity, if there's a way to maybe pick a more advantageous entity and get you converted to it.
Perfect. Did I get that right? We'll see if I can type so that we've got it up there. And it's reach out to Lindsey. She is an amazing, amazing resource. And I know we tried to pack a lot in. So I'm thinking this is going to give us another follow-up because I've got lots of questions and I know other people will. So if you're open to it, maybe next month we can maybe just pick one of them and kind of dig down a little bit more, or maybe just really talk specifically on the LLC S Corp. I think that's probably the biggest one that gets a lot of confusion.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, let's set something up. I'm more than happy to do a presentation going into more in depth. This is just to get people thinking of things.
And you did an amazing job of that. This is a complicated situation. And I want to encourage you guys, reach out to Lindsey, reach out to your CPA, reach out to an expert, because this is a lot to consider. And you already have enough on your plate.
Yes, exactly.
Because ultimately, it is your time to excel. So we want you to be able to do that. We want you to excel. So make sure you reach out and call Lindsey and get the conversation started. Thank you. I know we're going to be respectful of time, and I know there's so much. So we are going to get back on the calendar again, and stay tuned, guys. We are going to come back here and really dive into, because I think this would be a great series.
Absolutely.
To continue. So thank you again. Reach out and keep in mind, we are looking to inspire and ignite all the possibilities around because, of course, it's time to excel. Have a good one, everyone. Take care.